Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining our first data debate between two heavyweights, John Jones versus Cyril Gahn. That's this Saturday, though. Uh, Two very good friends, David and Ananth, who both have very exciting news to share. Uh, and David, why don't you start us off?
Yeah,
What's
so
new?
so what's new? Yeah, I've gone on to found Delphi with Michael Irvine. So I'm the CEO and co-founder of Delphi. Delphi is aiming to build a platform to solve the whole end-to-end workflow of how stakeholders ask data questions and have them resolved. And yes, we will be using some, AI magic in that process, but that's not, that's one part of the process. And we want to have a whole workflow to solve this.
And where
Ananth.
can people go to learn more?
Oh, so they can reach out to me on LinkedIn or Michael Irvine on LinkedIn, or they can go to delphihq.com.
Awesome.
Awesome.
And we're sad that you're no longer the head of data at Metaplane, but really excited for what's coming next.
Thanks so much, Kevin.
And Ananth, what's
Yeah.
schemata?
Yeah. I mean, schemata is something that I'm talking for a long time right now. So, schemata, in schemata, what we believe is like treating data as a product, and data driven products is a very efficient way to extract meaning out of your data warehouse. Like, you just data warehouse historically being like chunk of data, like garbage in, garbage out model. We believe data products is a better way to efficiently utilize and produce value for the business. Schemata is an end-to-end data product lifecycle management system, and the foundation of a data product, we believe, is the data contract. So schemata is a platform for you to programmatically manage your data contract between the producers and the consumers, um, and it automated so many things underlying for you, like in terms of defining your backward compatibility, defining your quality checks, defining your SLA, and like all those alignment, and then kind of integrated with your favorite data quality system, your favorite data catalog systems. So it's kind of giving you a broad understanding, or all the way from incorporating a data product or all the way to delivering the product, essentially. So that's essentially schemata. You can go to schemata.app to kind of understand what is the problem that we are solving right now.
So thank you both. And really excited to follow the journey ahead. And needless to say, David and Ananth are both seasoned data leaders across analytics and data engineering, and are two of the most qualified people in the entire community to talk about the main subject today, which is data contracts. Hot topic, many opposing viewpoints. We have two of them on the call today. And before we jump into it, let's get on some common ground. Ananth, you're talking about this a little bit, but what are data contracts?
Right. So what is really data contract? Essentially, the whole data pipeline workflow is a producer consumer workflow, right? There will be one producer defining some data, and then there will be n number of consumers consuming it. So the whole problem statement you can define as a producer consumer problem. So data contract essentially kind of minimize the friction between the data producer and data consumers in terms of what is being promised to deliver and what is being actually delivered. So if you can, like, very layman term, that's essentially it is like it's an efficient way to kind of solve an alignment between the producers and the consumers data.
David, what do you think? Agree?
No,
Disagree?
no, I totally agree. That is the data contract. Yeah.
Gotcha. So that, but then not on the high level in layman's terms. Like, what exactly is the thing?
Right. So when you take a data contract, or like, okay, so data contract essentially all deals around fundamental functional unit is data, right? So when you take the data, there are two fundamental natures of the data. One is structural part of the data, and then there's a behavioral part of the data. So if you take a structural part of the data, what is my structure? Like, this is my schema going to look like. These are the fields I'm having. This is a shape it is coming in. So you're essentially defining the shape and the structure of the data that's passed on to one supply, like, data pipeline entirely is a supply chain, right? Like you're passing from one supply to another supply chain. um, and uh, and that align with, like, okay, this is my service level agreement for you, this is the time that we'll be delivering to you, and all sort of other details. And then there is a behavioral part of it. you know Behavioral part is where the data quality kind of playing an important role here. Essentially, okay, I define my structure, I told this is an int, is it an int? And you told this is an user ID is coming in, but is it really a user ID? There are incidents that you might send like non-logged in users, session ID comes as a user ID, so you get a surprise. So when you say I'm sending this shape and the shape type is user, not the primitive type of int, is it behave what the customers are expecting, what the consumers are expecting? So combining both your structural and the behavioral guarantees that define and explicitly defined and well understood, and have a very well defined change management practice. That's what essentially data contracts are about.
And for my own curiosity, and maybe that of the audience too, is so you define these structural and behavioral constraints on your data from a producer to consumer. Where are those codified? Like, is it in a UI? Is it, and yeah, where is it?
Yeah. So it could be anywhere, right? Like the question is essentially like, what is your workflow look like? You know, Data contract fundamentally a productivity problem. The way we approach schemata is we treat this as a productivity problem rather than a contractual agreement like a DocuSign kind of a model. We are not treating that. So for an example, a developers might be like, let's say, two producer and consumer persona, like a developer. They are very comfortable working with the GitHub and then their own favorite IDE. They can go and change it and then they can commit the code in GitHub and all those sort of things, right? It will be a counterproductive for them to say, like, oh, you have to go to this UI, you have to click these buttons, right? Versus if you take the other end of the spectrum of consumers who are maybe data analyst or the data scientist, they may not know where is your schema, where is the structural contract it will look like, and I don't really need to know about all those things. I just wanted to see the whole relationship model, how it looked like, and I wanted to ask any modification or send any changes there. So an efficient data contract platform, essentially a workflow system that will not should not in should amplify the workflow of those producers and the consumer. It should not be a disjointed workflow. If you go with a disjointed workflow, then you will end up like a data catalog. You don't want to do that. I said that.
Yeah, no, for sure. Okay, we're gonna turn that into a blurb. No, okay. So and we should have a whole nother debate about data catalogs. So if I'm,
Right.
Please tell me if the image in my head is correct. So there's like a source of truth about, again, the structural and behavioral constraints of data on different levels of abstraction. It could be on the user, the business object level to like a column. And this source of truth, however it's represented, is like propagated into different systems, like CI/CD for an engineering team. It could be within Snowflake if you have like an orchestration check against it. It could even be in the BI tool. So you just take this and put it everywhere.
Exactly. So because the work is happened where it need, like consumers consuming where they needed it. Like so it has to be, the data contract should be integrated with your data creation process. Where you get data created, it has to be well integrated. The data contract platform should well integrate into the data creation process, right? If you are not integrating that, then you are not producing a high quality data. And why this is very important is that, the whole analytics and machine learning world with all LLM and all those things, and we are no longer doing a model centric world. Like we are more dealing with a data driven ML, right? So the higher the data creation, the quality in the data creation process, the higher the chance that you will be producing accurate results downstream, whether you are analytics or your machine learning. So the difference between a successful data-driven company versus non-successful data-driven company, the data creation process. So that's why we believe like data contracts absolutely critical for your success in building this data-driven organization.
And while we're on the topic of definitions, I'm just harping on it a little bit because it's the basis of what we'll talk about. Sanjeev asked the question or points out data contracts is the agreement between source and target. We termed as interface specifications. This is something we always followed in traditional systems and are still following. Is there any change now?
So I kind of presume traditional system by means like your operational API. Is that the traditional system, or you're talking about traditional system? Is that like a traditional data warehouse, right? That's the confusion, I think. If the questions are more around when they say traditional system, it's more of like APIs and then API contracts from a transactional system. There's a huge difference between an API versus data. So you see, when you're developing an API, the producer know exactly what they're exposing. What are the resources they are exposing. Like if you are giving me, let's say you're exposing a get users as kind of an API. The interface is well defined. You take a user ID as an input, and I'll give you the user objectives back. No matter how many consumers are consuming, that interface will not change. The input will not change. Whereas the data side of it, let's say you're creating a users table, and then you have like 10 different attributes, right? That will be 10 different inputs. The way the consumer going to see the users table, one consumer from another consumer will be completely different. Somebody will have an expectation around, hey, I don't want the address field not empty because I define my loan application guarantees or any other system can be based on my postal code and address, for example. And somebody might view that, hey, my email ID should not be null because my marketing email and everything is kind of going on this one, right? So for two different applications, you're taking the same data sets, but the whole expectation will be very, very different. That's why I keep on telling, like, the whole data contract or the whole data pipeline, the producer consumer relationship is like one to n relationship. And other nature of the data product is, or any data systems, the moment you build one data applications, like let's say you're building a user table and you're delivering on time, delivering in high quality, you will be seeing more and more use cases coming in around that because now you establish the trust, and you will be finding a surprise use cases all around you, and every use cases will have a very, very different expectations as the business context kind of changes. So that's why data contract, a lot of people kind of misassume that it's kind of a legal contract, then you have to go to fight in the court. That's not the case. It's essentially as a business dynamic changes, the consumer's expectation going to change. So it is an iterative process between aligning between the producer and consumer, essentially.
Gotcha.
One thing I was going to mention is we talked about where the contract can be enforced and monitored, and sometimes, like, I think when something like Metaplane picks it up, that's almost, it's too late. The horse is bolted, the data's already broken, the application is broken. It's great to be told, but we've talked about implementing this in CI/CD. One thing I wanted to ask you, Ananth, was like, do you see like dev tooling showing application engineers like, oh, while you're developing, you've broken, if you make this change and commit this and merge it, it will break? And I assume yes, and you've just nodded. But like, how would that be implemented in your mind?
So this is what we have done in the past, right? Like, let's say somebody is proposing a schema. So like the number one for the data contract to be efficient, have a structured logging, right? You have to predefine your structure, what you are emitting. If you are just doing random JSON, I think it's a high time. No, don't even think about data contract and all those things. Please include some kind of a structured logging. The type system can go a long way and save you a lot of money for your company. I highly recommend that. The number one, like, okay, you're defining the structure and you are going to change or adding a new field or deleting a new field. it has to be a backward compatible way, like in order for you to commit the change. So the CI/CD system will kick in and immediately validate your structural guarantees. Let's say, oh, okay, you don't have any. You are changing the data type, which is not allowed. I'm not going to allow you to merge the change, or this is a production pipeline and you don't have an SLA associated with that. I will not allow you to merge your code into my production path. So the CI/CD pipeline essentially checking both the structural guarantees are there. Let's say you define one pipeline or a table creation as a data product, but you don't define any data quality checks. There is no point of merging the code into this production, right? Because there is no guarantee that you are giving, and then you are marking this as a production ready. Same way, what the traditionally all the application development doing. If you're developing an API, you should have an SLA associated with it. If it is a public-facing API, you should have an SLA associated with that one, and you should have basic minimal, at least the red metrics that you have to monitor in order for you to kind of deploy any production code in this case. So very similar pattern that has been followed in DevOps model. Okay, these are the basic checklists. If you don't have it, we are not going to allow you to merge the code because there's no point of merging that one.
Makes sense.
Great,
and I can see how valuable that is. And kind of given that definition that Ananth just elucidated for us, David, if you could take the spicy question of the hour, who owns data contracts?
So I think we've seen a lot in writing, a lot of people writing about data contracts, that there should be this kind of negotiation that where like a product manager is like the adjudicator deciding, what should be in the data contract, what should be in that schema. And, the problem that I foresee with that is, I think at the very best, like tech companies, biggest with big data roles and massive like PM functions, I could see that working because they have the resources to do it. And Ananth, your career has been like better, like so far has been better than most people's whole lifetime careers. And you've worked at these massive companies like Slack and Zendesk. And I think in reality, there's a lot of companies out there where that negotiation process just won't happen. And as someone who's kind of pragmatic about wanting the data contract to improve quality, I'd rather that we at least started with the application engineer owning the contract, saying, this is what I'm going to emit at a minimal. I guarantee that I will emit that to this quality until I say I'm going to change the version, and then I'm going to look after the old version for a set amount of time so you can migrate. At least that as a starting point would be better than where we are today.
Yeah, I think as a starting point that might be little okay. I don't think any major, like let's say if you are running a 1% or a 2% data engineer at that point, you can just go to talk to a person and then you can done with that one, right? It's just like human interaction, right? Data contract really will be effective when you have a cross-functional team as either distributor located or it's large enough that it requires some kind of a formal communication methodology that requires, if every team is in the same room, or you just have like a handful of 10 engineers that you're just working together. I don't think this kind of a responsibility or this kind of a process really needed, right? You just take a quick decision and move on, and you just something is broke, you just go or talk over that one. The data contract kind of systems will be very effective when your system, when you are like 100 or 150 plus engineering team, and you're large enough and you have your data team dedicatedly, and you have more than one consumer started to come in, and then this whole process became very nightmare. So if anyone starting like even smaller than that, I wouldn't even worry about thinking about implementing any kind of a data contract system, in my opinion. As long as you have very structural logging, you can go along for a long path. I think the real problem of ownership will come when the teams properly aligned. The teams are larger enough that they need some kind of a communication methodology. along with that one. I think that is when they have their own backlog, and then you had to go and kind of negotiate with them to add any changes to your backlog. I think that is when the data contract platform will be very, very effective for you to kind of cut through those red tape and make it more effective, in my opinion.
I think there's also like a point where the ratios of like data people and product team to engineers is really important, because I've seen like orgs, especially in Europe, where the data team plus the product team is combined is 10% the size of the engineering team, and the scales there just mean that negotiation type data contract workflow just probably won't work as well with that. And that's again why I'm leaning towards the engineers just owning it to start with.
Well, I think scale is one part, but the underlying characteristics of the data ecosystem is a very important factor, right? So here's the first theory, right? The data quality is very subjective. Data quality, like, if you have a user ID, what is the user ID behavior supposed to be look like? It's a very subjective way to measure the quality of certain factors. It is not like well known, like, user ID as fundamentally is a string or an integer. What is a string and integer does mean to the business is make no make sense, right? It's like, um, and other nature is that the data is inherently social in nature. So the data will make more sense when it connected to multiple other data sources. A user's table alone will not give you any insight. You have to connect with your purchase table. You have to connect with your, you may need to kind of, join with your transactions, your marketing emails, and so many other factors there. So different people will view from different vantage point. And if you apply the subjective pattern of a data quality, that takes the data quality ownership completely from the producer, because producer will not have that perspective at all. So even though whatever the preliminary data quality standards or behavioral standard they can define by the data producers, it will be within their vantage point. That doesn't going to guarantee you that you are producing the high quality data that what they're expecting out of it. Right. So that is why I was thinking like the whole ownership is kind of, that's why I kind of tweeted like kind of saying that the ownership itself is kind of a misconception. We have to look from an RACI metrics perspective, who is responsible for it and who is accountable for it. Because when the moment you started to add that subjective nature of the data quality, and that is when this whole problem starting, right? So the whole observability platform trying to understand this largely, if you take like data testing, there's a two type of data quality checks. Like one is like what I call is a data testing, which is like you are measuring efficiently measuring, sorry, you are essentially measuring the known unknown, right? I know there is a user, I know there is an email, this should be an email format. I know that this is a pattern that I wanted to expect. The unknown is like the, like where the data drift happening, whether this kind of moving low or anything. We try to uh, we try to apply AI in the subjective matter of expertise, trying to bridge certain gaps here. But still, whatever the thing that we are learning from unknown, this whole anomaly detections has to be again human interpreted, has to be again opinionated, and has to be again feedback to the data testing tools here. And this all happened from the consumer perspective, where producers are really, really out of the loop. So the two, this is the two characteristics. Right? The third characteristics is incentives and motivation. Right? The producer, let's say you are taking about the developers, they don't have they don't have any incentive to kind of produce high quality data, or like they don't have any incentive to kind of talk to all the customers, all the understand all their vantage point, take all their opinions, and then build the data, embed the data qualities there. Because as a matter of fact, like, matter of truth is, nobody get promoted because you are emitting a high quality events. You will be get promoted if you are building, if you change your your click button to blue to red. That speak a volume rather than a high quality events, right? So um so The human nature is also like, you will be acting on top of what is a incentive that you have. So anything that we say that ownership has to go to the developers, which they don't have a motivation, they don't have an incentive. It's just like a forcing upon them, and it will bound to fail. I think, like after understand, like after I gone through this cycle of understanding this patterns, then I started to realize that data contract platform should be an enabler for the producers to better educate and still give the responsibility to the consumer, and make the producer accountable for to deliver what they agreed on, but they're not responsible to go and figure it out what is exactly what they needed from other side of it. Right? So that's my theory on who owns the data contract questions.
It depends. That's the answer, isn't it? That's what racy means.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Ananth, you brought up the interesting question of incentives. And you have incentives and you have enforcement. So from your perspective, given this idea that the people who enforce it should have the most incentives, should have the most domain expertise, from your perspective, who enforces data contracts?
So now, like we talked about accountability and responsibility, right? Responsibility fall into the consumer, and accountability fall into the producer. And who is the middle layer is essentially the data platform engineers, who actually so they has to build certain automation. Or if you don't have an automation, you play an intermediate role and say like, okay, this is where you have, so you agreed this, and you're expecting this. This is you're getting it of it, essentially. So um, if you can do it manually, it's totally fine. So actually, as a matter of fact, like if you're taking like a very smaller companies, this is exactly what is happening. If you don't have a data contract platform, everything happening in the data engineer side is a manual. For example, in a very recent example I have seen, all the data in Salesforce, Salesforce contacts shouldn't have duplicates. Like contact cannot have duplicates. So you just wanted to have a very valid information there, but things can go always wrong. And somebody changed in the producing side of it, and then data engineers import the data into data warehouse. Now analysis and the consumers are so upset about it. Like how can you have contracts wrong? How do you not know about it? And the data engineer's response is essentially, well, we are ingesting 40 other different sources. We are ingesting Marketo. We are like, the marketing has alone like almost like 30 plus SaaS tools in it. Like it's a crazy out there, right? So, you have something for forum, you have something for email, you have something for segmentations and all sort of a thing, right? Now, do we expect the data engineering team to know all the context and say like, oh, this is the data model of Salesforce, this is the data model of Marketo, and this is the nature that the consumers are expecting? It's literally impossible for even a 2% team to do that one. So right now, what is really happening in reality is the analysts kind of angry about the data engineers. Data engineers say, oh, we don't know that, and the analysts say like, oh, you should go and talk to the producer, and reach the producer to go there. And the sad part is like any of the interface like Salesforce, or even like some of the things like even streaming interface, data engineers don't control that, so they cannot really enforce anything. So they has to go and like, hey, can you do it in a goodwill manner, and like establishing a relationship and all those things. So this is what underlying is happening. This whole RACA metrics is like, the data engineers now blaming that the producer should get more ownership around that one. But even the owners, the data producers will also don't know about what is it, what is the duplication means for them. Certain expectation, they don't really understand that. So inherently, this is what is happening in a very human way. Like it's a very manual interaction happening all the time, back and forth.
And so this is why the need for these kind of automated enforcement systems, like bars, like Maroon, that will do these things for the data engineers based on the schema already agreed.
Exactly. Yeah, that's our mission of Schemata, because we believe that this is a bigger problem in the workflow side of it. Is like no one paying attention. There are a lot of bespoke solutions around there. Like we have different systems doing different thing in a very isolated way, and we believe that this workflow is worth of solving. And in my experience, I have seen any company that figure it out this workflow efficiently, they keep producing high quality data, and then they deliver a fast data products out of it, and they're able to successfully master in the market as they go.
Gotcha. We have a couple of great questions from the audience, and we're about at time, but we can go a few minutes over. Debra Prasad asks, end users will be choosing different implementations, as you alluded to before, Ananth. What would be the correct way of validating a data contract?
Right. So the consumers are responsible for defining what they wanted to do, but there is the responsibility still aligned with with the producer. So the producer explicitly has to agree and say, like, okay, let's say you wanted to enforce a new data quality check, or you wanted to add a new field in certain events. um, the producer has to agree that explicitly and say, like, yes, I'm going to honor what is your request to do that one. If you don't have this alignment along with that, then it will not be successful. So now many companies right now is doing in such a way, in a very ticketing system manner, right? So for example, if you take a typical tracking plan, if you put in the Google Sheet or you put in some kind of a tool, it is still a manual process. You put a tracking plan and you just go and create a new Jira tickets, and then somebody kind of implementing those things, right? So there are certain way for enforcing this kind of things in a very manual way. But this data contract platform should automate this whole process, making sure the changes is happening automatically, not a ticketing system. So that's absolutely critical for any data contract platform to be successful.
Gotcha. And speaking of contract platforms, Samuel asks, can you talk about the tools to make data contracts?
Yeah, I mean, happy to talk about more about Schemata. Please DM me. I'll think more of that one. I might be biased. I might be biased. So, you know, uh, there are like there are. It depends upon where you in your journey. What do you really wanted to do out of it, and where is the process is kind of going after this one. um, I think the simplest way to kind of start is like the Git repo. Like open a Git repo, define your schema structurally. Like if you have a JSON schema, use JSON's schema spec and define what is at least a structural property, what is coming from the producer and what is goes to the consumer. I think that will be a very good start. Even you don't need to kind of buy any tools or anything, but that's will be a very, very good start in my opinion.
Gotcha. Right. Like, don't go the full 9 yards if you don't have to. Walk before run. And I have one selfish question that I'm asking myself the whole time. Speaking of enforcement, you both talked about the automation and how big of a role automation plays. What about carrots versus sticks? Like, let's say that there is a violation of a data contract. Whether it is the data team, whether it's the consumers, the producers, or the data team that owns it, what can they do about it?
So yeah, carrot versus stick is an interesting approach, right? Like, so the whole the stick approach, unless and until you have a severe penalty financially for a company, your stick approach will not work, right? Like, let's say if you are violating GDPR compliant, you are not able to do it in 30 days, you will be has to pay $1 million. Then the stick approach will really works. Versus this is really a carrot approach. It's never going to be a stick approach for enforcement, right? So how do we enforce stick? Yeah. So how do we enforce the carrot approach? What we could learn from DevOps model, and this is what we are building in Schemata essentially, that I will be talking more publicly recently. Like we should learn from how this is the same problem for security team. This is the same problem for the DevOps team and the observability and monitoring team. You're launching an application, you have to obey, you have to kind of follow certain standards. You have to monitor, you have to have an alert, you have to have run book, you have to have on call process. Something has failed, how do the system getting enforced here? I think it's all boiled down to, can we build an organizational visibility? What is your health of your data contract across the things? If you build an organizational visibility, that triggers a very good human, that could be a very good human behavior, is because nobody wanted to be, no VP or no director of engineering want to go to a meeting and say like, hey, my health score is bad. I'm really okay with that. All right. So it's up to how are you going to capture those metrics, and how are you going to propagate, create those visibility across our organization, enable them to be successful. How do we kind of going to do that? How do, this is a current state, and these are the things you can do to fix it. And this is where you are like a week back, but this is where you are right now. Giving that insight will really, really help to force that.
Is this also like why lots of people say SLAs and things like that should be part of the data contract, because you can like say this level of uptime, this level of this level of time to rectify if something goes wrong. I
Right.
think that.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's why like data contract kind of capturing right from your data creation. That's why kind of mentioning schemata as a data product lifecycle management. The lifecycle start from the creation process and all the way to the operationalizing, right? Like so you define, you build, you test, and you operate. That's a four cycle of it. So all four cycle has to be governed, and that's what data contract kind of encapsulating, and that is what creating the successful data products essentially.
I've definitely learned a lot. I love that analogy. Of course, data as a product, but like as a product, what is the life cycle? What can you do about it, right? And
Right.
uptime of your software product.
Right.
I mean, come on, everyone. That's the most important thing. So this makes
Yeah.
a lot of sense.
So
Where can people go to learn more? You mentioned Schemata, you mentioned Delphi. Are there other resources that you would recommend?
yeah, totally. I think Chad write about little bit about data contracts. I think there's a couple of interesting article he wrote about it. I think he's one of the one person I would recommend to kind of follow. He's doing a lot of work. I think he's also kind of creating a company, so I completely recommend to follow him. Also, that under trend. And Jack Bustard Dev is another interesting open source product. Highly recommend to kind of follow. Very interesting product. I had a lot of promise into that one. So yeah, and as usual, Schemata is another way for you to do that one. So I'm really glad like a lot of people trying to really feel that pain and trying to solve this problem, right? So there are a lot of interesting conversation going around in this case.
Andrew Jones as
Sure.
well, who we've had on our meetups before. He's got like a Medium blog about how he's implementing data contracts at GoCardless as well.
Right. Yeah.
And so all these great leaders in the space, definitely check out Data Engineering Weekly as well, edited
Yeah.
by Ananth.
Yeah.
And thank you both for taking the time.
Great. Thank you so much. Appreciate
Thanks,
it.
Kevin.
All right,
Thank
thanks
you.
everyone. Take care.
Bye. Bye. Hi.
Still uploading. Oh, it's live.